Hey world, it's me, it's Lynsey G. I'm starting my live stream an hour late. Today I'm a little discombobulated. That's a good word for it. I am discombobulated. I slept in, which was great, and then just didn't get my day off to the start that I wanted it to. So I'm starting up this live stream late. I hope nobody was waiting around. Probably they weren't. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon in the summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, so my hope is that most people out there are having a great Sunday and not super worried about when I start my live stream reading, but, you know, if you were, I apologize. Anyway, I am here now. Everything is good, I guess. I mean, you know, relatively speaking. It's been a really, really wild relatively unpleasant 2 weeks here in the United States of America. Things haven't been going well here in the States. I am trying to keep an upbeat attitude about life, and I'm going to try to convey that attitude through this live stream. However, I feel a little odd saying that it's been a great 2 weeks, because it's, you know, it's been tough. Anyway, this week, I am here to read the penultimate chapter of my book. That is the second from the end, not the end. Many people get that word mixed up, so I'm here as a writer and an editor to tell you penultimate means second to last, not last. And the second to last chapter of my book is called Porn, Art, and Obscenity. This is a chapter from my book, Watching Porn, which is technically a memoir about my time in and around the adult entertainment industry as a journalist covering the industry. But it's actually a memoir only in name. It's actually an informative book about the adult entertainment industry, how it works, how it worked, especially at the time when I was most active in writing about it and being a part of it. Which was not, well, anyway, I'm not going to get into it, which was not super recent, or else I wouldn't have had time to write a memoir about it, obviously. This book has won an award. Check it out. It's got a little seal on it. It won the Gold Medal Award for Sex and Relationship Books from the Independent Publishers Award last year. It is out in hardcover and trade paperback and ebook, and there are whispers that there may be another version of it in the works. I can't really talk about it yet because nothing has been set in stone, but hopefully there will be another way to access this book coming soon. So this book has 21 chapters. Today we're going to read the 20th chapter. It's almost over. I almost have read the entire book live on stream. It's taken a little bit less than a year, and it's kind of awesome. So thank you to everybody who's watched. My throat is a little dry, so I'm probably going to be sipping from my water and my tea throughout the reading. I hope you don't mind. Before we read, I want to ring everybody in with an announcement of news. I guess it's an announcement. I actually don't know that much about what is happening right now. I haven't had time to look into it in the past few days. However, I have become aware that Twitter, which was basically the last social media platform where people could post sexually explicit content, has updated their terms of service and is making the platform much less hospitable for people who want to post adult content on Twitter. This is a big deal for anybody who makes and tries to sell adult content. Oh, hello, Adrian. Thank you for being here. How's it going? So I'm just telling everybody that Twitter has changed their terms of service, and it looks like they are going to be less kindly disposed to people posting adult content from now on. Twitter was basically the last social media holdout, like big social media platform, where you could actually put that kind of stuff up. And I don't know all the details yet. Like I was saying, I haven't actually read all that much about it. I've only like skimmed a few articles, but it doesn't look good for people who are trying to advertise their adult businesses and adult content on the internet. Basically, Instagram's already off the table, Facebook's already off the table, Snapchat still kind of up in the air, but Snapchat generally, it's been up and down as to what you can post on Snapchat. And I mean, Twitter really is one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, so the fact that they are looking like they're gonna be pretty much banning explicit content is huge. And I'm wondering if anyone out there who's watching this has any thoughts about that. Because, you know, social media, it's a weird double-edged sword for most of us. Like, it's free, right? Cool, great, free, we like free. And so it's a place where you can advertise technically for free. You can pay for advertising on Twitter, but it's pretty much a free advertising platform for people who are making content on the internet. And as sort of the last holdout for adult content on social media, it was really a haven for people who make adult content. And it's really going to have a negative impact on those folks if they can't, you know, post clips, GIFs, images to advertise their wares anymore. So a lot of people may see this as a good thing, you know, oh, it's making Twitter safer for kids or whatever. I'm not really sure that Twitter is a good place for kids in the first place, because there's still going to be allowances for all kinds of really negative things on Twitter. You know, people saying really horrible shit to each other, for one, which is kind of what Twitter is. But now, you know, dicks are no longer okay. Nipples are probably no longer okay. God forbid we see a body part. Anyway, that's my feeling on it. I think it's dangerous. I think it's bad. I think that we're really, really sliding down that slippery slope toward like just straight up censorship. Because, you know, all of the terms of service updates that have happened, all of the clamping down on adult content that's happened in the past few years on the internet is because of government rules. It's not, the laws in place in America don't say you can't make this stuff. They don't say you can't advertise this stuff, because that would be censorship. But the laws in place, SESTA, FOSTA particularly, are making it more and more difficult for people to make and advertise adult content. And they are allowing private companies like Twitter and Facebook they're holding these companies responsible for the content that their users post. So if the law SESTA FOSTA applies, or somebody thinks that it applies to content that somebody is posting on your website, you are now responsible for that content, which means that most of these social media platforms have just decided that nobody can post adult content anymore, because it, you know, they could be responsible for the fallout if they're found to be in violation of this new law, which is hurting sex workers left and right, and which is really, really, I believe, providing a slippery slope toward government censorship. So Twitter has fallen to the SESTA FOSTA overlords, and I don't like it, but I'm wondering if anybody who's watching this has thoughts on that. I'd be interested to hear them. I haven't had a whole lot of time, like I said, to think about it or read about it or write about it, so my brain is still pretty open. If anyone has thoughts, please feel free to put them in chat. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about before I launch into this book reading. Oh, good news. There's a new place that you can read all of my comics and graphic novels, and the ones that I have written, as well as ones that I've published for others. It's called Spin Whiz Comics, just like it sounds. It's a brand new platform for digital comics online, and my comics, Tracy Queen, Sex Positive Awesomeness, and Pack, this is issue 1 of Pack and issue 1 of Tracy Queen, are both there, as well as a whole bunch of comics collections. which feature my work and the works of dozens of other people from all over the world. They're all there under Oneshi Press is the name of my publishing company. So if you're interested in seeing what I've been up to in the comics world, as opposed to the prose nonfiction writing world, you can check it out at spinwiz.com. And if you want to know more, you can check it out at oneshipress.com. That's oneshipress.com. I think that's it. And since I'm already an hour late with this, I'm going to just go ahead and dive into the reading. So, since I was totally not prepared today, I totally did not get prepared well for this reading. This is a relatively long chapter, and as you can tell, my throat is a little scratchy. So I may choose to skip over some parts as I'm reading, things that just don't seem well suited to, you know, this medium or to the internet and the rules on the internet, perhaps. So I'm going to show you an image. There is technically nothing explicit in this image, so I am hoping that I won't get banned from the internet for showing it. This is an image, a photo, that was taken at a live recording of Ultimate Surrender, which I'm going to talk about in this chapter. Adrian says, this just does feel like the first step in censoring non-adult content. Oh, yeah, 100%, Adrian. There's definitely a what do you call it, a pattern that has gone on for a long time where the government, when it wants to do some wide sweeping change and crack down on things, tends to go for vulnerable communities first. I'm sure this is not news to anyone. And the sex worker and porn maker community is definitely vulnerable. Particularly sex workers who are doing survival sex work. And because a lot of the laws lump sex work together with sex trafficking, a lot of these things get twisted so that we learn to think of consensual sex work as the same as sex trafficking, which it is not, but that's really convenient for getting a whole bunch of vulnerable folks grouped together in a way that they can be legislated against, prosecuted against. And once that starts, once you've got this group of people being extremely vulnerable to a law that targets them, that law and the ideas that it has established and set a precedent for can start to, you know, work their way outward from the sex workers and the trafficking victims also, which we want to help, but these laws don't help. Yeah, basically it's that quote that has been being used a lot given everything that's going on here in America, about how, you know, they came for this group first and I didn't do anything because I wasn't a part of that group. Then they went for this other group and I didn't do anything because I wasn't a part of that group, and so on. This is definitely happening in the censorship arena around sex work and depictions of sex work on the internet. So yeah, everybody, just because it's happening to people who aren't you doesn't mean it's not gonna happen to you, because there is definitely a trickle-out effect. If they can get away with it with one group, they're gonna go for the next group and the next group and the next group until we can't post anything on the internet anymore. Jail says, so the government is literally saying showing a boob for money should be seen as the same thing as kidnapping. I am dumbfounded. Yeah, that's basically what they're saying. It's very tricky. The way that they've gone about doing this, the law that I'm talking about, I'm not gonna remember exactly what it stands for, but it's supposed to be able to target sex traffickers on the internet by finding the posts that they put on the internet. So the idea is that it's going to crack down on people who are kidnapping people and forcing them into, and otherwise forcing people into sex trafficking work. And that's, it doesn't make any sense. The idea is that it's supposed to be cracking down on these people. It's supposed to make it easier for law enforcement to find these people. However, what it's done is just removed vast swaths of content from the internet because people are afraid of violating the terms of service. People are afraid of violating laws. So people, A, have stopped posting stuff, and B, have been told by online platforms that they can't post sexually explicit stuff. They can't, like, I think in Facebook's terms of service, it's like you're not even really allowed to talk about sex in private messages anymore. That's their rule. Because anything could mean that you're a sex trafficker. So while the law is supposed to make it easier to catch people who are trafficking people, it's just made them not post on the internet anymore, which doesn't make it easier to find them. Like, it doesn't make sense. And basically what it's done is victimize sex workers. You know, a lot of people who do private sex work were using online platforms to advertise their services, but also to talk to each other about their clients, and to trade information and tips so that they could keep themselves and their communities safer. Now that you're no longer allowed to post those things, those communities have been made much more vulnerable. It also has really, really harmed groups of people who were using the internet to sell their services. So if they had like a booking situation set up on the internet, they pretty much can't do that anymore, because places where they could do it are not allowing them to use their platforms anymore. So a lot of people who were doing, you know, safe, consensual sex work on the internet now can no longer access work through the internet and are forced to do, you know, street-based sex work, which is way less safe. And because they don't have, you know, networks of like community networks where they can say, hey, don't let this person hire you, they are a predator, or don't talk to this person, they are a sex trafficker. Now people don't have access to those lines of communication anymore, so basically sex workers are being hugely victimized by this, and meanwhile, sex traffickers are just not using those ways to procure and provide sex trafficking victims anymore, and none of them are getting caught. None of this makes sense. It's awful, and it's honestly, it's coming for all of us pretty soon, I believe. I am feeling pretty pessimistic about the world right now, so maybe that's just me being pessimistic, but you know, the thing is that people in power over other people don't tend to just wake up one morning and say, oh gosh, you know, I've been a real jerk, I'm gonna change. So people who are, you know, victimizing sex workers and getting away with it because they think that sex workers are gross, or because they have a moral disagreement, or whatever their reasoning is. Actually, probably for a lot of lawmakers, it's saying, oh yeah, I voted on the Don't Help Sex Traffickers bill. You know, I voted yes, don't help sex traffickers, they're bad people. So it like makes them feel like they did something good when actually they're hurting huge groups of people. But you know, they're not gonna just be like, oh gosh, this was a bad decision because we're hurting people and I feel bad about it now, let's change it. That's not how it works, you know? People aren't gonna be like, oh gosh, we hurt sex workers? Oh boy, we should stop doing this thing. So I don't know, I'm feeling pretty pessimistic about how this law is going to affect everybody in the long run. It just seems like it's just gonna keep on rolling over all of our freedom of speech rights. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of writing on the internet, by the way, for anybody who's interested in learning more about this. The law is called SESTA/FOSTA. It's like Stop something of Sex Trafficking something Act, and I don't know, I can't remember. It's all about sex trafficking. But yeah, if you look it up, if you Google it, you will find a lot of writing done by sex workers saying like, this is hurting us. People are literally being hurt and killed because we don't have access to the same safety nets that we used to. Hey, this is terrible. Before it went to vote in Congress, people were saying, hey, this is terrible, don't vote for it. Nobody listened. I think that SESTA/FOSTA, when it went to the Senate, I think like one person voted against it because clearly none of them had read the law, and they were just like, oh, sex trafficking is bad. Let's vote yes on this. And it went through. Like, so even like your most progressive leaning senators, all these people that were like, yeah, these people are great, no, they totally all voted for it. So yeah, look it up if you want to know more about how it works. I don't have all of the details of the law in my head. I don't remember everything, so if you are curious, please do look it up. And, write to your lawmaker about it. It's worth a shot. Literally, for anybody who makes content and puts it on the internet, Sesta Fosta is a big deal. So anyone out there watching this, if you make comics, if you do art, if you write things, even if it's like fanfic that like 3 people read, this could really affect you. This could be a big deal for you. So I highly recommend that you look into it. Contact your lawmakers. I don't know, riot in the streets, maybe. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying it's an option, Anyway, okay. So speaking of censorship, let's talk about porn, art, and obscenity. That's what this chapter is about. This chapter ranges pretty far and wide, but we're going to talk about the history of obscenity laws in America, which, goes hand in hand with making and trying to sell art, and also with censorship. So let's dive right in. As 2011 drew to a close, I began conducting interviews for my art show, which I had decided to name Consent. I felt it was important to emphasize that when we get involved with pornography, our participation is a consented-to agreement, a relationship between pornographers and consumers. I hoped that in some small way the videos I would create might bring porn insiders and outsiders together and remind visitors of our shared humanity and our shared sexuality. I started the filmmaking process by purchasing a cheap video camera on the gallery's dime and setting out to interview people in New York. I tracked down a few near strangers I'd met at parties and through mutual friends, those to whom I had been introduced as the porn girl, those to whom I had been introduced as the porn girl and who also stuck around to talk to me. I also recorded conversations with a number of close friends detailing what porn meant to them privately. I included a few professional friends as well. Cindy Gallup, of course, a former adult script writer named Dan, one of the writers for Whack, whose perspective had always intrigued me, some poetry acquaintances, a fellow porn critic, and 3 adult performers who lived in the city, industry veterans Cinnamon Love and Brittany Andrews, as well as the then-novice Natasha Starr. There were others I would have loved to get on camera, some for very personal reasons, but I decided to limit my list of people to those I had never slept with one exception, but I will never tell you who that is. I didn't want to lose my focus on the art show in pursuit of my own libidinous curiosity. But my libidinous curiosity, it turned out, may have been my greatest strength in these interviews. I started every interview with the same, quite personal prompt. Tell me about your first experience with pornography. The answers were stunning. Not because the stories themselves were riveting, although some were, but because first times are formative experiences, particularly first experiences with smut. One of my subjects described the experiences as, quote, a feeling of shock. Something powerful was happening in my brain. Everyone remembers their first encounter with porn because it can color your outlook on sex for the rest of your life, depending on how much that first experience teaches you. But nobody had ever asked most of my subjects about this indelible first experience. Once they got started, the floodgates burst wide open. Although I had already spent years writing about the diversity of sexual desires in the world, the interviews I collected for Consent really began to drive home just how correct I had been. Particularly with regard to first encounters with pornography, people's responses and takeaways were wildly divergent. Most of us, upon our first encounter with this new, scary yet exciting source of pleasure and guilt, had nowhere to go with our newfound discovery. Friends might be alerted, but the adults in our lives who might have provided context for porn were rarely told about our illicit peeks into the things we were not to imagine them doing behind closed doors. One interviewee said that she began watching clips of anal porn in her early teens. I was really aroused by it, but I was embarrassed that I was aroused by it, she revealed. I would have been destroyed if my parents figured out what I was doing. And so she just internalized it and let it color her experience of sex for years. When she found out a high school boyfriend watched a lot of porn, she said, I started observing it more deeply. This is the really kinky shit to do. This is the way to be special. For some subjects, porn provided not just a template for sex, but a deeply conflicting outlet as well. One woman told me, for instance, that she had never been able to orgasm while watching porn unless something violent was happening in the scene, and that guilt plagued her. She had tried to quit watching it, she told me, but she also had difficulty reaching orgasm with a partner. So porn was her most reliable tool for climax. "I think that the porn that I watch is harmful to me," she said. A victim of childhood sexual molestation, she had a conflicted relationship with pornography in which she both relived and took control of the trauma in her past by watching smut that mirrored her own experiences and feelings of anger. Her story, upsetting though it was, reflected a trend. For many of my interview subjects, porn was a source of great shame. But, as one of few things in modern culture that is usually kept private, their relationship with porn was safe from prying eyes, and it was thus, in a weird way, freeing. In a porn viewing session, viewers would let go of their walls that they had constructed around the formative traumas, their darkest desires, their fear of discovery. In many ways, this sounds healthy. Wouldn't we all love to let go of our baggage even for a short time? But the taboo around pornography, and often the types of porn that these people consumed, made their relationships with the medium fraught. For others, the taboo around porn was its draw, and this fascinated the hell out of me. Personally, I've always been intrigued by the forbidden, but not so much in order to revel in it as to break down the socially constructed walls that make things forbidden in the first place. I'm an Aquarius. But, oh man, I need to clip myself doing that. I need to have a clip of myself going blah 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 and just put that on the internet for the world to see. It's very attractive, I'm sure. But some of my subjects enjoyed pornography as consumers or creators because of those walls. For them, porn felt like a playground where they could drop all expectations. Porn was a gleeful opportunity to indulge in the things they knew that they weren't supposed to like. For performers and producers, the act of making a taboo form of entertainment liberated them from the rules of a Puritan society, and they used that freedom to push every limit to near the breaking point. As a point of pride, as a form of art or activism, or just for the fun of getting away with it. Others saw porn as just an interesting but atypical diversion, something they had tried but never found compelling enough to make a habit of. These interviews were short, but I was amazed by them. I suppose, had I grown up in an environment in which sex was not the most forbidden topic, perhaps I'd never have been so drawn to pornography. Most of those lacking interest in porn came from open and accepting backgrounds, in which shame didn't enter heavily into the dialogue about sex. I envied them in a way, but then I also cherished the dark and forbidden rush I felt when I watched porn, even after years of doing so professionally. I'm not sure if I would trade places with them if I could. A shared theme among interview subjects was that very few had ever purchased pornography. Those who had actually shelled out legal tender for smut tended to be older and had made most of their purchases before free porn became readily available, via magazines, videos, or visits to porn theaters. Of the younger interviewees, a few more fiscally responsible souls had subscriptions to one or more membership sites, but most did not. Several blinked at me, uncomprehending when I asked them about paying for porn. One said, "I guess it just doesn't seem worth it. I can find enough for free that it doesn't matter." What was most frustrating was that many of these subjects also complained about not being able to find porn that they liked. Some complained about the production quality, others about the content on tube sites, but they were united in the fact that finding good porn was difficult. I intimated to them that if they did a bit of research and spent a bit of money, they'd be able to find something more edifying, and to ensure that more of it got made. The responses I got were mostly polite and a few incredulous. "I tried to pay for pornography for the first time," said one disgruntled guy I spoke to, "and I found that the movie was unavailable for digital download, and they wanted me to pay $20 to get a DVD shipped to me. At that point, I was like, fuck you, I've tried to do a transaction and you're being a dick about it." He gave up and had never attempted to pay for porn again. Eccentricity was not unexpected in these interviews, but eccentric trends were a fascinating surprise. Several cisgender men informed me that they saved their favorite porn, but not in the way that you might expect. They didn't download entire videos, but rather still shots or short clips that they handpicked from their favorite moments of a porno. As they were watching, they would hoard these moments to a cache on their computer. It was a time-honored ritual that they indulged in as they neared climax, amassing gigabytes of the most orgasm-inducing moments of their masturbatory forays. But when I asked them why they did it, they had no reason at the ready. They didn't even go back to their smutty cache to enjoy what they had saved. Their sometimes massive stockpiles of pornography just sat on their hard drives, never being enjoyed again. The phenomenon confounded and sort of obsessed me, and to date it still does. Were these men saving their favorite moments because they felt a need to gain a more personal connection to the people on the screen? Did the act of clicking save cement the glorious moment of release in their subconscious? I probably will never know, but I wonder how many people out there engage in this little quirk. The one thing that banded everyone together, from performers to critics to tube site frequenters, was that they loved talking about porn once I got them started. Some of the interviews went on for over an hour, and I loved conducting them. My overwrought schedule was exhausting, but I was so excited to be talking to people about the issues that had obsessed me for years that I hardly noticed. In October, I flew to the Bay Area. My primary goal was visiting a friend in Oakland, but I had also arranged to meet with a personal hero of mine, Madison Young, as she was setting up an art show for her queer feminist art collective, Femina Potens. Madison had begun her porn career as a mainstream porn star and rose through the industry's ranks in LA before branching out into more indie and feminist projects. She prided herself for bringing feminism to mainstream porn by visibly enjoying the hell out of her scenes, refusing to fake orgasms, and supporting her art space in San Francisco with the earnings from her anal scenes in LA. At Femina Potens, she had cultivated a community of like-minded queers, feminists, and progressives under the banner of art and revolution, and had then begun to direct and perform in queer feminist performance art that often ventured into pornographic territory. When I met her, she was also running the womanspov.com, and she had just given birth to her first child. We met at a gallery space in the Mission District and plopped down on the floor, the white walls reflecting the midday sun and the space echoing with music blaring from a radio down the block. My friend, who we'll call Leah, with whom I was staying, filmed our interview, which turned into a rambling conversation about our childhoods, philosophies, desires, and fears, and porn and art and feminism, and bondage and kink and fetishes. Madison showed me the bruises covering her ass after a recent caning session and brimmed with joy while she told me about the experience. She caressed her still full from pregnancy body as she talked about her love of rope, the ecstasy she found in relinquishing control, the joy she felt during rough sex. She referred to the mainstream porn she used to make as fast food porn and spoke of the deeper, more nourishing fare she and others in San Francisco were making. She spoke of art and porn as one and the same, both parts of an evolving mystery, and as the interview wore on into its second hour, I felt her excitement about these topics seep into me. A day or two later, Leah and I ventured back into the Mission to visit the Armory, the home of kink.com at the time, it's not anymore, and the epicenter of American kink pornography. I had scored 2 press passes to a live taping of Ultimate Surrender, a sex wrestling event in which competitors grappled while performing sex acts on one another for points. When the bout was over, the winner got to fuck the loser, all in front of a cheering crowd of onlookers and, of course, the cameras which streamed live to paying customers around the world. Leah and I were nervous. Both feminists, but with different degrees of comfort with pornography and live sex, we weren't sure what was in store at Ultimate Surrender. I was worried that I had dragged my sweet artist friend to a horror show of demeaning activity. We sat in a holding room near the building's main entrance with other audience members, taking in the architecture of the massive structure. Built nearly a century earlier to resemble a medieval castle, the Armory had served as an armory and arsenal and occasional prize-fighting arena until 1976. It was purchased in 2007 by what is now the largest kinky porn company in the world. It's an interesting melding of entertainment, sex wrestling. In many interviews I've done, porn performers have told me that they enjoy doing extreme porn, not because it feels good so much as because they wanted to prove that they could. Toughness is something worn like a badge of honor. When Katsuni told me in 2010 that in porn, quote, the key of success is a balance between will, strength, pleasure, and intelligence. There was a reason she put will and strength at the front of the list. In pornography, going big is a way of getting noticed. Houston, a self-described, quote, porn superstar, set a world record by having sex with 612 men in one day at the filming of the Houston 500 in 1999. When I asked her about her motivations for going so over the top, she told me simply, I was making history, becoming an even bigger star, dominating the porn world. I wanted to be the biggest porn star in the world, and that's what I did. Her feat required physical stamina and true grit that I will never be able to approach. Toughness can also be a mark of dedication to making great entertainment. Kaylani Lei, a tiny but powerful performer, said to me during an interview, I can be my little 4'11" self and take a mean big cock in a scene. Granted, I'll be sitting on ice later that night or walking funny the next day, but hey, at least we got a great scene. Women like Kaylani feel that sometimes gritting one's teeth to get through a scene that pushes their limits can provide a reward in the form of an excellent product. For others, extreme porn functions as a physical paring down of the self into something more free and honest. Oriana Small, formerly known as Ashley Blue, was the queen of extreme porn in the mid-2000s. She told me that, quote, with people there watching, it felt like a wrestling match, like I was strong. For those who enjoy using their bodies athletically, porn is an excellent fit. Or wrestling. And most amateur wrestling doesn't pay as well as porn wrestling, so hey, why not? But then again, why? When they let us into the arena, Leah and I took advantage of our press passes to nab front row seats, setting up the camera we had brought and reading our pamphlets while wishing we had known in advance that the event was BYOB. We were about to witness a featherweight tag team event, our informational pamphlets told us, the first of its kind. We'd signed paperwork to confirm that we realized our faces might be live streamed to the world, as well as waivers cementing our understanding and comfort with what was about to take place. The MC explained the rules. Points were awarded for sex acts performed on a member of the opposing team. Basically, the goal was to pin down or otherwise immobilize the opponent, then disrobe, lick, tickle, kiss, fondle, face sit, smother, or finger her for points. The first team to amass a winning number of points got to choose an appropriate sexual punishment for the losers. Leah and I settled in with trepidation, bemoaning our sobriety as the games began. What followed was, to put it simply, way more fun than we expected. The wrestlers genuinely enjoyed themselves, with screaming orgasms forcing a pause in the action several times during taping. When Team Blue eked out a victory over Team Yellow, the winners brought in two of Kink.com's best wrestlers, Isis and Donna, to help deliver a 12-minute hardcore strap-on gangbang that included all manner of depravity and ended with several squirting orgasms from Team Yellow as the crowd roared its approval. In the end, I'm pretty sure everybody won. Back in New York, I upped my commitment to interviewing. I recorded primarily in people's homes to help set them at ease. This meant I was running all over New York City, usually after work on weeknights, and occasionally doing several interviews back-to-back without time for dinner, all while juggling my already overloaded schedule. I was, in a nutshell, a complete wreck. One night just before Thanksgiving, I left work to attend happy hour with one of the gallery staff members. She took a good look at me and told me I needed to slow down. I agreed, then went out to conduct 2 interviews in a row. Over the course of the evening, I had about 3 drinks, but no food. I left my last interview at around 11 p.m. and boarded the subway back to the Bronx, so exhausted that I was afraid to sit down for fear of falling asleep and missing my stop. I leaned against the doors of the 5 train and put on my headphones, keeping my brain active with a podcast. Until suddenly, I woke up. On the floor of the train. There was a man standing over me saying, "Miss, are you okay?" I was confused. I had no memory of losing consciousness, but I suppose that's how passing out goes. The man, assisted by another who had joined him, helped me to stand back up. "You should sit down," they said. "No, I'll be fine," I answered, leaning back against the door and trying to make sense of what was happening. I was frightened, but mostly embarrassed. When I'd woken up, my face had been smushed into the subway floor, and I wondered vaguely if I had fallen in a really unattractive way. Had people seen my nose crunched up like a pig? I glanced out the door as we slowed down to stop at 96th Street. I was almost home. And then I woke up. On the floor, again. This time, the 2 men helped me to a seat. There were plenty of them available on the late-night train, and I felt silly for not having just taken one in the first place. Now a fuss was being made over my stupid mistake. I looked at the doors again. They were open, and we were still at 96th Street. I felt my heart rate quicken. How long had we been here? How long had I been passed out? Oh, dear God. Horrified, I realized that I was the sick passenger slowing down the train. The sick passenger that made hundreds, even thousands of people late to their destinations as other trains backed up behind mine, while I sat on my butt waiting for a medical crew to arrive and cart me off to a hospital. I was holding up every one of those people who just wanted to get home to their families and their beds. I looked around. Everyone was staring at me. I couldn't be sick. I couldn't be the sick customer. I refused to be that guy. Someone, sounding far away, said to me, "We're calling an ambulance." And then, the idea of a hospital visit confronted my reeling brain. A New York City emergency room is basically the last place any sane person wants to be. Hours in the waiting room, hospital staff who hate their lives and their patients, harried doctors, insufficient care. A whole night in the hospital, missing work the next day, maybe having to cancel interviews, all followed by an astronomical bill. I was lucky enough to have great health insurance through my employer, but even that wouldn't entirely cover a visit to the ER. I could be in debt for months or years. I stood up in a panic, yelling, "No! I'll be fine! I'm just going to get off the train." I patted my skirt down and stepped onto the platform. As one of the train crew came out to implore me to wait for medical attention, I shook my head. "No, thank you, I just need some air." I got out of the station as fast as I could, bursting into the humid late autumn night. I was embarrassed, terrified, and still confused. The cold air and moisture revived me enough that I could wander the Upper East Side for a few minutes, getting my breathing under control, before finding a cab, calling Matthew, and bursting into tears. I managed to take the month of December completely off from Whack magazine, and this lightened my burden considerably. But I kept up my breakneck schedule of interviewing people in New York for apexart, working my full-time job, writing for dirty print magazines, and dating 2 people. In January, I flew to Los Angeles to collect interviews from more porn performers. My month off from Whack had been moderately restful, and I had regained enough energy to be excited about renting a car and touring the city on my own. The interviews went swimmingly, and the majority of my subjects agreed on one thing. They loved sex, and they had found a legal industry in which that love was rewarded. All right, I'm going to skip over some of the details of interviews with April Flores, Naomi Banks, Kelly Shabari, Cinnamon Love, Oriana Small. Oh, and actually, no, I'll tell you about my weird experience with Oriana Small. Okay. One afternoon, I called Oriana Small to confirm our interview, and she instead invited me to a photo shoot she was doing that afternoon. I had recently finished reading her memoir, Girlvert, a retelling of her days as the reigning queen of gonzo porn when she was the star of the JM production series Girlvert. In that series, she had gleefully tricked other women into brutal threesomes, tear-inducing punishment, and more, while playing the role of a bratty teenager with a sadistic streak. Her brand of porn had always upset me, but her book floored me. It's difficult to describe, but it revealed to me some part of the human psyche that I'd witnessed yet been unable to process before. After what I'd read in our correspondence earlier in the day, I expected to enter a porn set in the hotel I had been summoned to. So when I walked into a tiny room strewn with vintage clothing and makeup, I was surprised to find Oriana in a black and white checkered skirt suit with her lips painted to match. On her back, with her legs splayed, as another model, Audrey Bernal, stood over her in a latex French maid outfit with a chainsaw held aloft. The legendary kink photographer Eric Kroll was responsible for the mayhem, and after attempting to find a place for me to watch events unfold, he instead invited me to take part in the shoot. In short order, I was clad in a gold bodysuit, holding Oriana's arms down while Audrey dribbled a homemade concoction of grape jelly, salsa, ketchup, and water over Ori's vulva and thighs. She was attempting a blood splatter effect, but ended up with a more menstrual-looking scene, while Eric snapped photos of our ridiculousness. It was a surreal afternoon. We got lunch afterward and talked, but Oriana didn't have time for an interview. I did, however, get some diverting photos emailed to me a few weeks later, and a Skype interview with Oriana that I used for the art show. I actually attempted to use that photo in the book. Since Eric had sent me the photos, I thought that I would be able to use them, but there was a whole licensing thing that ended up happening, and unfortunately we weren't able to get the photo into the book before the book had to go to press, so we don't have it in here. And unfortunately it's a pretty explicit photo, so I can't put it on the internet, but it's really funny. Anyway, after a few days, I left LA and drove to Las Vegas. I figured that AVN would be a perfect time to collect interviews, with porn stars gathered like fish in a proverbial barrel, but I discovered that I had grossly misinterpreted the situation. During AVN, everyone is running from shoot to signing to public appearance and back, booked to the gills. An hour-long sit-down video interview in a quiet place was not an option for most. I did manage an interview with Danny Wilde, a performer with whom I'd grown close through some of my correspondence with Cindy Gallup, and whose nihilistic perspective intrigued me in the same uncomprehending way as had Oriana's. Danny worked occasionally in queer and feminist productions, but spent the majority of his time in Los Angeles, where his status as a bisexual man who had started in gay, straight, and bi porn made him a rare figure. We had a great talk in his suite high above the strip, talking about the need for an open dialogue around the pressures that porn places on male performers. I went back to my cheap, read smelly, hotel and ordered cheap, read terrible, room service that evening, instead of lingering outside the awards show. I had considered getting tickets to the AVNs and trying to nab a date on my solo trip, but after a week of chasing porn stars around multiple cities, I was so tired that I didn't even want the awful wine that came with my dinner. And I had been disheartened by the state of the convention. It had been moved from the sprawling sands to the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, and I didn't see the move as a positive one. The Adult Entertainment Expo and its attendant Adult Novelty Expo were big enough to take over every one of the smaller venues' convention halls, with some booths spilling out into the hallways between them. But that made the show floor a bewildering maze of wall-to-wall people. I had wandered the aisles alone, looking for familiar faces, and often got lost. I collected a few video interviews for Whack as I wandered the floor until I came upon the same pro-dom friend who had recently helped us with the disastrous party in New York. As we chatted, I noticed a man in a large cowboy hat ambling by. When I turned to look, there was a pair of light, grayish-blue eyes piercing back into mine from a jovial face that I recognized. Max Hardcore. The man anti-porn zealots point to when they're screeching about exploitation, degradation, and coercion. The man who more or less invented the term skullfuck, an oral sex move in which the fellator is forced onto the fillatee's cock by a hand on the back of the head, usually forcing the cock down the throat until tears and gagging are produced. The guy who made his models call him Mister in knee socks and pigtails, and in some cases siphoned his bodily waste into their various orifices, mouths included, on camera. The guy who had just been released from a 30-month federal prison sentence for disseminating obscenity. That guy. He and his case had fascinated and repelled me for years. Obscenity trials in pornography are relatively rare, given that porn is not strictly illegal, but under the second Bush administration they had picked up significantly when the Department of Justice's new Obscenity Prosecution Task Force formed by W himself. Bush was so focused on prosecuting pornographers for obscenity, in fact, that after he was sworn into office, adult entertainment lawyer Paul Cambria, together with porn industry leaders, developed a list of sex acts and themes that pornographers were encouraged to avoid in order to duck obscenity charges under the new administration. The Cambria list isn't a set of rules so much as guidelines that include nearly everything we're used to seeing in porn today. Degrading dialogue, double blowjobs, facial cum shots, and it has been criticized for discouraging normal, healthy acts like male-to-male contact and interracial sex. However, the list also cautions against a few acts that have remained taboo, and which Max Hardcore enjoyed filming. Shots with the appearance of pain or degradation, and peeing indoors, to name a couple. In the W years, several others had gone to court over their work, but Max Hardcore was a different animal. I'd become a little bit obsessed with him, and had interviewed several performers who had worked with him, Oriana Small among them. I wanted to find out what made him tick. I had been told that he was a friendly, soft-spoken guy with kind eyes, but that sweet-tempered reputation just didn't match with his films. Make no mistake, I'm not just talking about hardcore sex. I'm talking about hiring very young women who are often new to the industry, putting their hair in pigtails, dressing them in clothes that make them look younger, requiring them to talk in baby voices, and asking them to pretend that they are 12 years old. I am talking about Max, who usually starred in his films urinating on his co-stars, and I'm not even going to read the rest of this, because I'm live. But there's a lot of really upsetting stuff in my list of things that he'd done on camera. Max Hardcore was literally the monster in porn's closet. But although his work horrified me, I wasn't sure I could agree with him being locked in a federal penitentiary for making what he considered artistic expression, no matter whether I liked that expression or not. As performer and artist Mei Ling Su, who had worked with Max Hardcore by her own request, told me in an interview, Max Hardcore may not have started out thinking he was going to make videos to challenge authorities. I think he just made videos he wanted to make. It was the law that made oh my god, hang on, this isn't a hard sentence. Okay. It was the law that made a political statement out of him. What that means for us is up to us. Do we shrug our shoulders and say, serves him right for being so deviant? No one should do anything beyond the norm. Or do we say, this is wrong. No one should go to jail for consensual sexual expression, on camera or off. I suppose that Max Hardcore represented to me the limits of artistic expression being pushed to their furthest extreme, and then peed on. But had those limits been broken? All his paperwork was in order, with I's dotted and T's crossed. His co-stars were duly paid for their performances, and none had ever pressed charges or testified against him. Some starred repeatedly in his films. Clearly they were as excited by his shocking exploits as he was. Mei Ling Su told me that she enjoyed the experience and consented to everything that happened, which left me with little footing to feel disturbed by what had gone down, other than my own squeamishness. She told me, "Consent. That's the line. It's obscene when the participants are below the age of consent. It's obscene when the participants are coerced or drugged against their consent. Obviously, there are videos that depict non-consensual sex or underage sex, played by consenting adults, and those can be scary and sexy, and it messes with your mind. But I want to know that it's all in the realm of play, and that in real life, it's being carried out by responsible adults." So, did Max Hardcore's films merit obscenity convictions, or merely a pass from those who were too weak in the stomach to handle them, like myself? Unable to get the case out of my head, I had written to Max in prison in 2010. He responded with a 5-page letter handwritten on lined notebook paper that he had turned into stationery. "Max Hardcore," it said at the top, "America's most wanted pornographer," trademark. There was a 3x5 photo of him behind bars in a trucker hat and a tank top with an acoustic guitar in his hand and a toothy smile on his face. Clearly photoshopped, it gave the impression of a simple, all-American guy wrongly imprisoned on a trumped-up charge. The letter complained, in high-minded language, about the failure of the justice system in persecuting an artist like him. Despite his lawyers' quote, "inspired interpretation and logical explanation of the U.S. Constitution," he said, the 11th Circuit Court had denied his appeals, and he remained behind bars for, quote, "making religiously immoral motion pictures which were too tawdry for the poor people of Tampa to tolerate. It should also be stated," he went on, "that there were never any allegations of anyone who was compelled to perform in any of my movies. Also, no one in Tampa, Florida, where I was prosecuted, had protested my productions." That much was true. He had been convicted not because people had objected to his films, but because the Bush-appointed task force had purchased several of his works online and had them mailed across state lines to Florida. These films were meant for distribution somewhere in Europe, where obscenity laws were more lax, and were not marketed for an American audience. How the feds were able to worm their way out of entrapment for this one, I don't understand. His letter continued, quote, "Equally unsettling is that a jury of my purported peers would be unable to understand the importance of free expression as a fundamental human right. They sentenced me to 46 months in prison, along with a fine of nearly $100,000, simply because my movies had somehow violated their mysterious community standards, which are nowhere written down. As a result of this outrageous travesty of objectivity and open-mindedness, I am being held against my will in very substandard conditions here at the decrepit La Tuna Federal Correctional Institute." As dramatic as his wording may have been, I had to admit, Max Hardcore had a point. Here's the thing about obscenity laws in America. To call them vague is to give them a lot of credit. Firstly, what qualifies as obscenity is material that does not merit protection by the First Amendment and can thus be censored. However, there is no standard metric for what constitutes obscenity across the nation, leaving each federal district, state, and community therein free to decide what it finds unprotectable, and for the courts in that district to set their own precedents. If the material in question passes over state borders via post, said material comes under federal jurisdiction and can be tried at the same level for obscenity, thanks to the Comstock Act of 1873. The vast majority of pornography is now, of course, distributed electronically, which has fluffed feathers on both the porn and law enforcement sides of the obscenity issue. There's no real standard in place yet that specifically applies to online distribution, which is one happy reason why many sex acts have become normalized in the internet age. 100 years after the Comstock Act in 1973, the Supreme Court instituted the 3-pronged Miller test. The Miller test is our most current rubric for determining what is obscene, and it is at once frustratingly imprecise and beautifully nebulous. A work can be considered obscene only if it meets all 3 of the following conditions. 1. The average person, applying contemporary adult community standards, finds that the matter, taken as a whole, appeals to prurient interests. Number 2. The average person, applying contemporary adult community standards, finds that the matter depicts or describes sexual conduct in a patently offensive way, which is specifically defined by the applicable state law. And number 3, whether a reasonable person finds that the matter, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. The first 2 prongs of the test are held to local, quote, community standards, which, while the last is held to a broader standard of what a reasonable person of the United States would think, so as to avoid giving any one community too much sway over a ruling. And the third prong provides some safety for pornography because, according to the Miller test, most pornography with a storyline can't be proven to have no literary or artistic value. Gonzo porn remains in murky territory. There is limited context for the sex and therefore more room to push community standards past the third prong. Max Hardcore's work, as material that pushed well past what most communities would consider acceptable limits, straddled many of these blurry lines. Hardcore had been a target for obscenity prosecutions for over a decade before he was convicted. His first trial, for child pornography, was called off when the Supreme Court ruled that adults portraying children in films were protected under the Constitution. In 2005, his offices were raided by the FBI and several computer servers were seized, but no charges were made because, ostensibly, nothing illegal was found. Finally, when his company, Max World Entertainment Incorporated, was indicted by the Department of Justice Obscenity Section in 2007 on 5 counts of transporting obscene matter by use of an interactive computer service, and 5 more counts of mailing obscene matter, Hardcore was found guilty on all charges, and in 2009 he was carted off to La Tuna, from where he wrote to me in 2010. He was released in July 2011, and he attended the AVN Expo in January of 2012. When I saw him, I froze. I turned to my friend and whispered, "That's Max Hardcore. What do I do?" "You should interview him," she said simply. I screwed up my courage, turned on my heel, and walked right up to my nightmare. When I introduced myself, he displayed a vague memory of my letter, and when I asked him to talk to me on camera for whack, he was happy to oblige. He offered to film it himself, as he was experienced with POV camera handling, he said. But instead I handed the camera to my friend, and off we went. What followed was probably only about 5 minutes of chatter, some of which was lighthearted banter about what he planned to do now that he was out of prison, his answer, make more films, and some of which went deeper into his motivations, his answer, art and freedom of speech, which did not really constitute an answer per se. And we talked about his feelings about having been sentenced, his answer, outraged and shocked, naturally. I don't recall many details, but I do remember looking at his incredibly white teeth as he grinned his way through the interview, and his blue eyes wandering over my body when he offered to cast me in one of his films. He reminded me of a shark, always smiling but cold. I walked away trembling. My friend handed me the camera, and I mentally logged myself 1 point in the badass category. When I got back to the hotel room, however, I checked the footage. There were a few fumbling seconds showing my feet facing Max's on the bright casino carpet, but then it cut off. Apparently, my shaking hands had incorrectly pointed out the buttons, and the entire interview had been lost. In the years since then, Max has faded from the public eye. He still tweets, and I saw him on the 2018 AVN red carpet mugging for the cameras with an astonishing young-looking woman in tow. I avoided making eye contact. In hindsight, I think I spent so much time trying to figure out what it was about him that so compelled and terrified me that I ended up learning more about myself and about porn in the process. It wasn't Max himself that was so enthralling to me. It was what he represented. Excuse me, my throat is not agreeing with this reading process. Okay, the thing about Max Hardcore that terrified me was what he represented. Oh gosh, hang on. A little more water. Okay. Max Hardcore made porn that married 2 things that Americans love. 1, violence, both physical and emotional, and 2, sex. And he did it in a way that could be labeled as dark. He brought in an element of brutality that, to my mind, does not easily fit into the category of erotic entertainment. As a pacifist, I found Max's work abhorrent because his definition of pornography was at odds with my idea about what porn could and should be. In my idealistic way, I'd been building a case for the ways in which porn could be empowering for those who make it and those who watch it. I'd gotten warm fuzzies during interviews when people said things like, Sex is one of the most empowering things in the universe, and also one of the most beautiful. It should be celebrated and showcased. This was Raven Alexis in 2010, by the way. And I had taken that sentiment to heart. I had been cultivating this middle space, hoping that we could all get together there and shake hands. I still believe in the importance of that space, and as more people have stepped into it, I've seen the value it holds for many of us who have been victims of the negative attitudes our culture feeds us about sex. But not everybody wants that middle space. We don't unanimously look forward to breaking down the barriers between them and us. And we don't all think that pornography needs to be healthy. As I've said before, lots of people like porn because it's taboo. They enjoy the thrill that they get from watching people do things they're not supposed to do. Furthermore, some people really legitimately love to degrade and to be degraded. Many find a safe and legal vent for these impulses in pornography that reflects their darkest desires. Max Hardcore had made some of that pornography, and that doesn't make him the citizen of the month, perhaps, but it also doesn't make him an outright monster. If there's anything that the process of interviewing people about their experiences with sex and porn has taught me, it's that no matter how open-minded, how expansive I want to be, I will never get it all. Everyone is different, and when it comes to sex, they are so very, very different. I will never be able to wrap my head around why Max Hardcore would film women drinking his urine out of one of their own body cavities, but Max Hardcore will probably never be able to understand what I find so compelling about watching a woman receive cunnilingus from a POV camera angle either. I feel a little confident in saying that one might be objectively less upsetting than the other, but I'm not here to judge. I'm just here writing about it and asking others to talk about it too. So that's the end of that chapter. There's a lot of stuff crammed in there, and I kind of wanted to separate it into smaller chapters, but then it would have been like 3 really short chapters instead of 1 really long chapter that covered a lot of stuff. So it all got smushed into one. I am really sad that my interview with Max Hardcore didn't end up getting recorded, because I want to prove that I did go up and talk to this guy. He still scares the hell out of me. I have had other opportunities to interview him. I think I contacted him via email when I realized that the video interview didn't work, and then I chickened out. Like I said, I saw him last year at AVN, and I chickened out of making eye contact or, seeking him out later. Because I feel like I spent a lot of time really racking my brain over this guy, trying to figure out why anybody would do the things that he did. And also, more than that, trying to figure out why people would watch the stuff or participate in the stuff that he made, because I just found it so awful. But actually, in the process of writing this, I kind of realized that, it doesn't really matter. I don't like the stuff that he makes. I would never watch it for fun. I find it abhorrent. I find it wrong. But I don't think that he deserved to go to jail for 3 years. That doesn't make sense to me. So I don't know. I'm always interested by that kind of moral conundrum, ethical conundrum stuff. If nobody's being hurt, if everybody's consenting, if people are, doing it because they want to, and then other people are watching it because they want to, I don't think that any of us have a right to say that that's wrong and you have to be punished for it. I don't think that makes any sense. I do think that the type of material that Max Hardcore makes should not be viewed by people who don't want to view it. And I certainly don't think that the type of material that he makes should be marketed to a wide audience during primetime television or something. It's very, very much a niche market. But I think that the people who want to watch it, especially if it helps them get some of their darker urges out in a safe and consensual environment, then cool. I don't know, but it's really upsetting, because then even just saying that, I start thinking, well, what if people have these dark desires and they see it on film and then they think it's okay and they hurt people? I don't know. It's one of the more confounding parts of, I don't know, the human psyche generally and what we do with it, on a larger scale. So I don't know. It's an interesting, interesting thing to think about. Yeah, that guy's still out there. As of the last time I checked his Twitter, he was not making new material, but he was linking to old videos that existed. I think that they were all on his site. I don't think that they were like on Pornhub or anything. I mean, honestly, from my perspective, I would not encourage looking up the stuff that he makes or made. I don't think it's healthy for the world that it exists. And there are others like him. You know, there are definitely other people who have made similar content that is equally as upsetting. Many of them have been brought up on obscenity charges. Very few of them have actually gone to prison, though. Because as I read, the Miller test makes it actually very difficult to successfully prosecute someone for obscenity. There's another guy, John Stagliano, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, who was brought up on federal obscenity charges a few years ago. And the case against him was just totally mangled. Like, the prosecution did not have their shit together, and he got off scot-free. Because honestly, the stuff he was doing wasn't anywhere near the level of what Max Hardcore did. It was just some weird, kinky stuff. And he actually gave the keynote speech at the AVN Awards that I attended in 2010? I don't remember. But he gave a really rousing speech about the importance of freedom of speech and about how, you know, as much as many of us may look down on the work that pornographers make, how pornography has really upheld our freedom of speech again and again, because pornography is who people go after. That's what people want to see shut down. And by pornographers standing up for themselves and standing up for freedom of speech, whether the rest of us like it or not, they are keeping our freedoms safe. And I really do believe that that's true. Adrian says, the performer's consent is very important, but could possibly be misinterpreted from a viewer standpoint. Yes, Adrian, that is a hugely important point. The thing about porn that blurs the lines of consent is that, you know, it's meant to be viewed by people who understand that it is a artificially created product. You know, Max Hardcore created these scenes that were like clearly upsetting and depicted sex acts which are blatantly illegal, you know, like with minors. But the thing is that if you bought one of his DVDs and watched it, at the beginning there's a disclaimer with a 2257 notice saying all of the people in this film were of age. Their identification information is available at this address. You can contact these people, the people who made this, and find out, you know, you can like go to this physical location. Literally is required that you put this in your porn when you make porn. It is required that you say, this is the address where all of these identification documents can be found. So if you buy and watch porn in a responsible way, when you're, you know, in the middle of watching the scene, you can suspend your disbelief, but it's made very clear from the packaging, from the product, from the 2257 notice, all of these people were of legal age and consenting adults. The paperwork has been signed. These people have been paid. Like, this is all above board. And that's why it took so long for the federal government to actually get him on obscenity charges. I don't really know the details of like what it was exactly that they finally got him on, but they had been trying to get him in jail for years, and they kept trying, and he was like, no, like, all of this is legal. I have all the paperwork, I have everything. And the thing about that is that most of the porn that we watch now is pirated and taken out of that context. So, you know, you go to Pornhub or another tube site and you just click on something. There's no 2257 notice. There's no packaging. There's no like intro music. There's no credits at the end. There's nothing that's saying very clearly, this is a constructed artificial situation. These people are all here on purpose. You paid for it. Therefore, you know it's a product. And I think that is really doing a disservice to the types of pornography that can be upsetting to people. It's also just difficult, like, back in the day, when Max Hardcore was selling DVDs, it was very unlikely that you would stumble across that type of content, this like very extreme, very hardcore content by accident. You know, there was always, you know, people pirating things here and there, putting up photos or whatever, but until the last 10 years or so, and he was operating mostly in the early 2000s, it was like, unless you were looking for that type of content, you pretty much weren't gonna find it. And that's really the disservice that I think free streaming porn has done for us. Like, in some ways it's great, because of free streaming porn, you can find things that you might not have found before, and maybe things that really do it for you, and that's cool. But you're also much more likely to stumble across something that you find upsetting, and then having to grapple with that while you're in a very vulnerable, you know, emotional and physical state. And, you know, stuff like Max Hardcore, like, that could end up very easily on Pornhub. And people could think that, oh my god, this is happening to an underage person. People could think like, oh, this is what the porn industry is like. Everybody makes this type of, you know, degrading content. People can get all kinds of incorrect ideas and really be freaking terrified. Or you know, when your brain is going on a certain trajectory, when your hand is down your pants and you're on a free streaming website, you can make some synaptic connections that maybe you're not a fan of, but have been made by your, like, crocodile brain. And I don't think that's good. Like, if you stumble across a video that, like, most of your brain is saying, oh, this is awful, but some part of you is like, oh, wait, no, this is arousing because we're watching porn right now, that can really mess you up. So basically what I'm saying is, Adrian, the performer's consent is super important. And, you know, back in the good old days of DVD porn, the performer's consent would be made very explicit by the packaging of the product. And we don't really have that in the way that most of us consume porn anymore. And I think that a lot of the sort of pearl-clutching, like, terrified reactions that we get culturally to pornography, they come from a good place, which is like, yeah, I don't want my kid or, you know, just random people stumbling upon porn that could be damaging to them. That's legit. But it also comes from, a lot of the time, a very misguided, uninformed perspective where, like, yeah, somebody sees really violent porn and they think that that's what porn is then. And they think that porn is victimizing these poor people. And they don't understand the production process and the marketing process and, like, all of the artifice that goes into making this product, because it's not presented to them that way. And I think that that's actually just as dangerous as the fact that this material gets made. You know, if this material exists behind a paywall, where you have to prove, you know, your age and you have to fork over money for it, and so you're basically only getting it if you really want access to it, then I think it's not harming anybody. But when it does get into a situation where you have random people stumbling upon it without any context, then it can become very dangerous. Yeah. Adrian says, most forms of censorship are misguided. At least I think so. I think so too, Adrian. I mean, I think so too. I don't think that censorship is a good thing. Because, like you were saying before, it's a super slippery slope. If you just start saying that it's okay to censor this stuff, then what about this stuff that's nearby? And then what about this other stuff that's also nearby? And, like, soon, you know, we can censor anything. Goodness knows we're getting close enough with fake news and all that to just saying that, you know, that freedom of expression isn't worth it because it's upsetting somebody at the top who has a really bad hair and skin situation going on. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a capitalist conundrum, right? Because in a lot of ways, I think that you could see Pornhub and other sites like that as an answer to capitalism. You know, give everything away for free and, you know, damn the man. But the company that owns Pornhub is making a shit ton of money on ads. So it's really not an answer to capitalism at all. It's just deeper capitalism. And because in capitalism we are all taught to love free things, and because of capitalism none of us have any money, so we can't purchase nice things. I mean, I can't afford anything. We end up in the situation where there's just all this free porn and it's not all necessarily healthy for everybody, and that's a conundrum. And the real bummer about it is that, you know, the people who make it, like Max Hardcore, who I do not like, who I do not support, but this guy was held responsible for distributing obscenity, which is total bullshit. Because I read about this. He made a bunch of DVDs that were marketed to a European audience because the stuff that was depicted in them was more legal in Europe. Federal agents found these DVDs available on his website, purchased them, and then had them shipped to themselves in Tampa, Florida from, I think he was in California at the time. It's not like he was putting up billboards all over the place that were saying, Max Hardcore films, get them here. It's not like he was advertising, like I said, during primetime TV to families across America. It's not like he was trapping people into watching this content. It was sequestered away on the internet on his website and a few other websites where you had to go and look for it and pay for it and have it shipped to you to watch it. And the fact that federal agents were able to go through this series of hoops and then bring him up on obscenity charges because he was shipping things across state lines. Like, I don't understand how that's not entrapment. Like, it blows my mind. Like, he was not trying to get this into every home in America. People sought it out, and then they got mad about it, basically. And I think that's ridiculous. I mean, to be fair, there are very few things that actually qualify, like, across the board as obscenity. And I don't think that Max Hardcore's stuff should have, but I guess they had a really strong prosecution team on that case. I don't know. They had better lawyers, you know. Anyway, it's a really deeply upsetting quandary that you can get into when you start thinking about this stuff, because, like, there's really no one right answer, I think. You know, like, I personally think that, generally speaking, when everything is sort of evened out, I think that pornography is generally a good thing. I think that particularly in our country, in America, where sex education is terrible, where we are afraid to talk about sex in a real way, pornography provides an outlet, an educational resource, for better or worse. You know, it's important that we have some kind of access to our sexuality, even though it's not always healthy, even though it's not always, you know, the most empowering depiction of these things in the world. Like, it's important, and I think it's doing important work in the world, and I think it's a good thing. But, you know, anytime that there's anything that's good, there's gonna be some people out there who are making it bad. Like, that's just, I don't know, part of the human condition or something. Like, there's just always gonna be people out there being jerks about it. And what can you do? And I don't think that it's ever fair to say, because these few people out of the whole of humanity are doing something that we don't like, that means that the thing that they're doing in a way we don't like has to be bad across the board. That makes no sense. It's a really black and white, you know, positive, negative only way of looking at things. It doesn't allow for nuance at all. And I think that if there's one thing you can say about human beings, it's that we are nuanced and complicated and difficult. And if you apply the same rules to everyone across the board all the time, you're gonna end up in some really bad situations. That's why censorship, I believe, is wrong. Even though if you don't censor things, you're going to end up with people making really, like, gross stuff. It's not okay to say that nobody can make anything, you know? But it is a super conundrum, because you're always going to have those people out there doing things that you don't like, that you don't agree with, and what are you going to do? I guess you're going to try to stop them from hurting people. You're going to try to make sure that those people who are making that stuff are not hurting anyone in order to make it. And if they are really hurting people, then you deal with it. But, you know, I don't know. I don't know. You know, the fact that nobody ever testified against Max Hardcore, that none of his performers ever testified against Max Hardcore, doesn't mean that he didn't hurt anybody. It might mean that they were scared to testify. That's totally true. That's a thing that happens a lot of the time. That's why a lot of people who've done bad things get off, because people are afraid to say anything. So I can't say that he's never hurt anybody. I'm sure that he has. I'm sure that there are people who showed up on his set not aware of what was about to happen and were damaged by it. I'm certain of it. But, you know, due process is a thing, and I don't really think that, given that none of those people came forward to say, oh, look, there's a dust mote. Oh, how fun. Given the fact that nobody came forward to say, he hurt me, he should go to jail, I think it's pretty fucked up that he was in jail in the first place, even if he is a reprehensible human being. Which maybe he is, and maybe he's not. I don't really know. I sure don't like him. He gives me the creeps. Ugh. And he always wears this stupid cowboy hat. Except for that picture in jail when he was wearing a trucker hat. I wish I had it on hand. Like, I know I've got it somewhere around here. Actually, no, I think I only have it on in digital format. I think the actual photo and letter are somewhere else. But I don't have it on hand either way. But it was just the funniest photo. He was like this all-American, like, tan guy, and his big smile, and his blue eyes, you know, and his trucker hat and his guitar behind bars. It was just the most ridiculous thing. All right. That being said, folks, I am going to call it a day because I'm hungry and I have a lot of other things that I have to get done. So I will be back in 2 weeks. That's going to be, what, the 21st? I'll be back on July 21st to read the last chapter, the ultimate chapter of watching porn. It's a relatively short one. And then I'm going to have to figure out what I want to do with the back matter. I have a whole bunch of, like, fun little lists that I don't really think I could get away with reading live on the internet, though. So, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, come back on the 21st. Ooh, it'll be the 21st, and I'll be reading the 21st chapter. Ha! Fancy that. What symmetry. Adrian says, thank you again for another great stream. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Adrian. I really appreciate when you engage, you know, when you ask questions and make statements and stuff, because I realize that a lot of the subject matter that's covered in my book is some stuff that many people are not really comfortable talking about openly. And that's fine. That's legit. I totally understand why lots of people aren't going to get drawn into a deep conversation about some of these issues. But I really appreciate it when people do interact with me, because I really feel like I'm kind of putting myself out there with all of this, and it's really great when people are supportive of that. Adrian says, and thank you again for helping to further the dialogue regarding these issues. Thank you, Adrian. I am trying. I am doing my best. All right, everyone. I'm going to head out. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll be back in 2 weeks. I'll see you all on the 21st to read chapter 21.